even though the marriage isn't working out or is coming to an end, there is a version of this that looks like ending it well. There is a way to live in a co-parenting harmony with your ex-partner and your kids. There is a version of that. I see it all the time.
Welcome back to LoveLink. I'm your guest host and therapist at Modern Mind, Tess Hochberger. Today, I will be speaking with my colleague and fellow Modern Mind therapist, Yaron Schwartzman. And today we're going to be exploring the two layers of conscious uncoupling. First, the emotional and relational practice of dissolving a partnership with integrity. And second, how the practice becomes more complex, more consequential, and more delicate when children are involved. Yaron, I'm so excited to be speaking with you today about this topic. I know you have so much insight in. To get us started, I'm wondering if you could set the scene for us a little bit by just sharing your conceptualization of this phrase, conscious uncoupling.
Yeah, thank you, Tess. Really good to be here today as well. I think, conscious uncoupling has gotten a bad rap in the popular culture. It first showed up, in the Gwyneth Paltrow, whatever, Chris Martin thing. But the reality is that it's a really important part of the process when you're divorcing. And, divorce is really the one thing that's not actually supposed to happen in life. We're taught to expect everything from death to taxes, even marriage. But for divorce, there's literally no preparation for it. There's no ritual. There's no ceremony. There's no language for it and no roadmap. And when people get married, there's a whole infrastructure that rises up around it. The vows, the showers, the witnesses, the blessings, the honeymoon. And when people divorce, there's nothing. There's a legal process waiting for people, one that's not regulated or designed to help people regulate or to grieve. It's designed to protect assets or sometimes unintentionally to amplify conflict. And then you throw children into that, it's just absolute chaos. And the other part of it, I think that, conscious uncoupling starts to try to unpack or soften is that divorce gets filtered through one dominant story or narrative, which is failure. Personal failure, moral failure, just a giant colossal failure. And that story is not only incomplete, it's just wrong. And because divorces aren't about one thing, they're nuanced, there's so many factors that go into it. And many times it's about casting or timing or attachment. People evolve, they grow, they change. And two good people can simply be the wrong people for each other over time. And there's no training for that moment. No one teaches you how to divorce, to uncouple. No one teaches you how to protect children from adult pain or to nurture their confusion and pain. And no one teaches you how to end something with dignity out instead of destruction. And I think conscious uncoupling tries to address that. It's the beginning of trying to address that and to go into that, difficult moment for everyone in a mindful, intentional way.
Wow, that's such a beautiful concept or framework that you're putting out here. And there's so much here around the narrative that we all learn about relationships and love. And there's so little that we learn going into relationships about how scary and powerful an ending can be as well. It's also making me think about, as couples therapists, something we talk a lot about is how conflict can actually be one of the most beautiful opportunities for growth. And in relationships, and especially in divorce, we don't really get any of that narrative that this can be something that we can grow from. And there's so many key words here that we're throwing around. I want to make sure our listeners are clued in with us. I'm wondering, how do you define conscious uncoupling and what makes it different from a traditional breakup or divorce?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think that just the act of conscious uncoupling, just the act of going into a space, a therapeutic space with a therapist or with a mediator to try to resolve your conflict, that in and of itself, or try to like untangle your personal values from what's happening, because oftentimes, obviously, divorce is one of the hardest moments in a person's life. And so just the act of going into that space is already more intentional, more mindful, kinder and gentler than really the traditional divorce, which is simply to barricade yourself or to go into a bunker and to go into a state of conflict, a prolonged state of conflict where, you know, the model is scarcity. Like, what can I get for myself? How can I protect, you know, whatever I need to, and without consideration for how the other person feels. And when there are children involved, for any consideration for the impact that it has on them. So conscious uncoupling, in and of itself, just the act of going into a therapeutic space with your partner, wife, husband, and attempting to resolve the issues, to untangle in a way that feels gentler and kinder, is in and itself is different from the kind of the traditional approach, which is, you know, just war essentially.
I am loving this language around untangle. And I think there's something so powerful happening in this narrative around, like you said, this legal mindset that's so much about like, you get this and I get this, rather than entering into this with maybe an abundance mindset rather than scarcity, and the untangling rather than tension or friction happening between two partners.
Right. Yeah. I think that's right. I mean, the impetus that for conflict, the dynamic is so kind of set up to create a fight, you know, and to, you know, feelings are obviously hurt a lot of times sometimes when people divorce, obviously, like, they've moved apart from each other and they can be amicable, but many times it is high conflict, and there's a lot of high emotions. People are, you know, there are affairs, people lie about money, people are dishonest about a whole host of things. So people feel hurt, feel betrayed. And it is one of those moments in life where it's really, really hard to keep in mind that there's another value here that's present, and that's the one that'll possibly carry you through in the safest way possible as you go through the process, you know, which is, you know, it's hard to keep that in mind when you feel so hurt, you feel so attacked, you feel so misunderstood, and you're just in a lot of pain. And so, you know, again, the act itself, the coming in to a therapeutic space already, I think, speaks volumes about your intention, and I think it bodes well for what might happen. Even though, of course, it's no guarantee that people will resolve all of their conflicts amicably, or will find a way through it that isn't high conflict. But it's at the very least, it gives the couple an opportunity to do that.
Yeah, I love the addition here of intention in the conversation, especially shared intention, and that's really necessary to even show up together in a therapeutic space for that mediation. And, you know, even in that description, we're hearing so many of these kind of words of negative connotation around endings, and this idea that a divorce is a failure in so many people's eyes as like a social or cultural construct there. But I'm wondering, in your experience clinically, personally, how do we take this blame and these kind of scary shame experiences and turn that narrative to become something that can be really transformative?
The truth is, it's hard. You know, the hope is that you can get to that place, but in the beginning, there's so much pain, so much misunderstanding, and it's hard to get that, to find a guiding value or guiding light that feels bigger than what's happening for the individual in that moment, which is they're hurt, they're in pain, and they're suffering. So I think a lot of conscious uncoupling is also to hold space for that pain and to suffering. I'm not trying to sugarcoat it. I'm not trying to make it something that it isn't. You know, you're not trying to force or impose a transformative experience necessarily. You're holding space for people to be hurt, to be in pain. And then at the same time, hopefully shifting their gaze slightly and reminding them that leaning into that pain, amplifying it with blame, with both the personal shame that you feel, but certainly the shame that you make the other person feel, simply deepens, prolongs, and amplifies the impact. And so again, there has to be space for grieving. There has to be space for the pain. There has to be, validation for what they're going through, and this isn't going to somehow magically disappear. But also to remind them that there was love. There was a reason they were together. And how do we move forward in a way that honors both the love that was there to begin with and the values that we want to carry ourselves with, moving forward. And that becomes especially poignant when you have kids, because they didn't sign on for the conflict. They didn't sign on for the trauma. They are, the proverbial innocent bystanders. And so the motivation to really regulate yourself as a parent is very, very high. It's always there no matter what, but when kids are involved, it becomes really tangible.
The proverbial innocent bystanders is so important. I think of the children of divorce as these witnesses, and that's such a poignant way to bring them into the conversation. Divorce doesn't happen in a container, and yet you, as a conscious uncoupling couples therapist, you do so much work to honor and hold this pain and this fear and this hurt, but also at the same time really amplifying the connection and the love that brought us here, that created this family in the first place. And that strength of the connection and the love is probably, I wonder if that amplifies the shame and the blame that does come into the conversation. So yeah, I'm wondering if how accountability in this process does show up without kind of collapsing into that shame and that blame.
Yeah, I mean that's a great question, and that's the tension I think that really shows up first and foremost. When kids are involved, is like, how do you're compelled to take accountability for your emotional dysregulation because you can see the immediate impact that it has on the kids. And yet at the same time, you need to be able to process what's happening for you. And so it really does become this incredible kind of, you use the word container, but this container for all these conflicting emotions. On the one hand, you're angry, you're upset, you're hurt, you're feeling personal shame for things you may have done or contributed to the demise of the relationship. Certainly you might be feeling that about your partner and what they may have done. And yet at the same time, you need to be able to protect your kids. And most people that come to me have a really strong understanding that their kids' well-being is paramount. And so they're compelled to try to figure out how to regulate themselves. And that process you were talking about in the beginning, it's a real opportunity for growth where, a lot of people might not be so quick to grow, might not be so quick to find that in themselves were it not for the kids. But the kids kind of really put that dynamic front and center. And so it really is, it can become this cauldron of conflicting desires. One is to nurse, to protect yourself from more harm. Two is to really kind of lash out at your partner if you're angry and upset with them. But three is also to protect your children and to be able to regulate yourself so that you're not having your hurt and your pain and your sadness spill over onto them unintentionally and not mindfully. And so it can be a real cauldron. A lot of people that I see, couples that I see that come in with kids, do an incredible amount of growing in a very short space of time because it's just such a unique space to be in, right? You're just most people don't have that impetus. They don't have that carrot to grow. So they tend to linger in the hurt and in the pain. Whereas couples that have kids and especially, and the concern for their well-being is paramount. They're really, compelled to grow and to sometimes grow quickly. And so sometimes the alchemy from pain to something else, to this, kind of like, their best selves actually happens with surprising speed.
That's so beautiful to be able to witness from your seat in the therapeutic space as well. I'd imagine, you know, witnessing so many different types of couples and different phases of their relationship and seeing how children do impact our adult relationships is overwhelming, it sounds like, to know that I'm in this situation and I'm trying so hard to protect my own heart and unfortunately protect my own assets legally, but there's this whole other being here that we both have this deep rooted responsibility to protect and create stability for, even in one of the most destabilizing experiences that, like you said, really doesn't have a framework that we are taught how to maneuver.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. There is no framework. There's no guideline, although people have been getting more support, and people are more aware of the impact. And there's more studies that show that more than anything else with children, you don't need to be perfect, but you need to be predictable. And one of the parents at the very least needs to be predictable, needs to be emotionally regulated. And the studies are pretty conclusive about the impact that it has on the kids when that happens, or lack thereof. And so there's a lot of the couples that come to me have some sense that that's where they want to get to. They have no idea how to do it. They have no idea what needs to be processed, but at the very least, they have a sense that this is how they'd like to show up for their children, how they'd like to show up for each other. And in the cases, and with my couples that have like done the work, again, the growth, the personal growth, and that's I think the other unintended consequence is that they come in oftentimes thinking this is for the kids, but they find that actually like the self-regulating that they do, the ability to like empathize for the other person and their pain and what they have to go through in order to show up for the kids, all of that kind of actually ends up being much more of a healing process for them, than just as a kind of lip service to the children or to the well-being of the family. It tends to be kind of fertilizer for personal growth. This is one of those things, like if you allow the process to happen, and if you slowly steer away from the guilt and the shame and the acrimony towards something that feels like your original values and the way that you want your children to certainly participate in the family, it becomes a catalyst for your own personal growth.
Wow, it's like a side effect of
Yeah.
the family healing is this
Yeah.
internal empathy. Wow, that's so confusing for some people, I'm sure, but I
Hmm.
love that fertilizer reference that you made there. And I'm I'm thinking about this idea of predictability as well.
Mm.
And this is something that I see with my individual clients as well, adult children of divorce in the therapeutic space, either intense craving for predictability or resistance to predictability and routine.
Mm.
And I'm curious to hear a little bit more from you about how this can be a stabilizing force for kids in the midst of a separation.
Yeah, I think, predictability is sort of like, I don't know, emotional calcium for kids. It strengthens the structure. It's the thing that they crave the most, especially young kids, but I think all children. They require that rhythm, the same homework, the same bedtimes. The more it can stay inside the bubble of what's predictable for them, the more they're able to regulate, the less impact that divorces has. And there's a lot of different studies now about what kind of a structure what's better for kids, whether it's two-parent homes. There's this concept that showed up in the last couple of decades, nesting, the idea that kids get to stay in one home. That can work, but the evidence that it's better necessarily than two-parent homes is pretty thin, and you really need to be on the same page across the board. The parents really have to come in and really be on the same page. And it can't be like a territory where there's a lot of passive aggressive sniping and there's a lot of, the energy kind of gets destabilized. And so it can be a great solution, but the parents really need to be on the same page. They really do need to be amicable. And then that could be a beautiful solution. But otherwise, even two homes, as long as the rules and the regulations more or less stay the same bedtime, the same patterns, the same rhythm, it's shown that like much younger children under 7 or 8 require more frequency. So like more of familiar with the 2-2-3, like 2 days with the mom, 2 days with the dad, and then alternating weekends. Older kids do better with less frequent handoffs. So week on, week off, so they're able to establish their own routine and their own personal space and kind of less moving around. That's the other part of this thing that parents, when they're getting divorced, don't necessarily think about. But this is a lifelong commitment. This child is a lifelong, it's not just 18 years, it's beyond. And so at every stage of the child's growth it requires different things. And the more the parents can cooperate, the more there's open channels, the better they can help the kid navigate everything. The more acrimony, oftentimes parents don't talk to each other, and then the kids understand that the experiences are siloed, and then there's a lot of like leveraging one parent's experience against another person's experience, a lot of triangulation. Initially, like the thing that you're mindful of is not having the parents triangulate with the kids, not adulting the kids, not using the kids as kind of emotional regulators. This is a big thing. But if the communication if you don't get to a point where the communication is fairly open and fairly transparent, what happens is the kids then become their own kind of agents in the triangulation. They'll create one set of relationships and one set of expectations with one parent and another with another. And that is as powerful as it might seem for the kid, it actually creates a lot of psychic chaos. So again, a lot of incentive when kids are involved to kind of get it right early as possible and to get everybody regulated. So you're not using your kids as kind of emotional hostages, even if a lot of times, in the beginning, it's not that the parent is doing it intentionally, but they're not aware that they're transmitting their pain and their suffering onto the kid and that they're adulting them. They're not aware that sometimes it can feel like intimacy if they share something, but the wrong thing shared in the wrong way puts an undue burden on the children. And so again, conscious uncoupling is a really good, I don't say echo chamber, but a really good filter for like trying to understand what works, what doesn't work, what really isn't the domain of the children, what really should be kept to with yourself, into your therapeutic setting, friends and adults. Oftentimes, you'd be surprised, parents don't really have a sense of what the separation is. Some things are clear, but other things are a little murkier, but kids carry a lot, and they carry more and they see more and they understand more than parents sometimes give them credit for, but they do. They carry a lot.
Hi, LoveLink listeners. Our group practice, Modern Mind, is located in New York City with offices in Brooklyn and Manhattan, offering in-person and virtual psychotherapy. We provide individual, couples, and group therapy, as well as ketamine-assisted psychotherapy in conjunction with a psychiatry prescriber. Therapy is a powerful experience that can transform your life and help you live it to its full potential. We're here to help take you where you want to go. To find out more about our practice, visit www.modernmind.co or email info@modernmind.co to be connected with one of our therapists.
It's sounding like the conscious uncoupling in the therapeutic space is really just that first, like very beginning step to setting this path forward for how to even talk about the intention of this family system. How are we going to maintain a united front as parents, even if we are every so often changing our system, because the system will need changing depending on real life external factors, depending on the child's developmental phase. And I think that's so important to always ground in too. we have to give children so much more credit for how much they are taking in, and that kind of note around the schism of maybe values and rules and boundaries that can happen when they kind of come to one parent for something and go to the other parent for another. It does create that psychological chaos. And I'm sure we both see that in adults in the therapeutic space in their own individual sessions as well.
Yeah. Yeah, no,
Yeah.
I'm divorced, and I've got three kids, and sometimes every once in a while, my oldest will say something to me from 10 or 12 years ago, and I'm like, huh? He will have picked something up, or something that I thought was a throwaway, or some part of the dynamic, or something that I just, I wasn't mindful of in the beginning. And I really do wish that I'd gone through this process myself with my ex-wife. I think it would have been, like, there's no way to go through this without making mistakes. And that's the other part of this that's important. Like, you're all going to make mistakes. We're all going to fall short of the glory. It's a human process, and it's a live situation. So the idea that we can hermetically seal everyone and insulate everyone from everything is also kind of unrealistic, and also puts too much pressure on couples. But definitely, the more mindful and the more intentional and the slower you are as you go into this, the less reactive, the less kind of worried you are about your own emotional well-being, your own, I'm saying it the wrong way, but just it needs maybe a little less like reactive and defended in terms of like, your hurts and your needs, and kind of being able to see the bigger picture. Because a lot of the things that feel really immediate, really burning, really pressing at the beginning, and in the ground zero of the divorce, oftentimes you forget about them. But then, if your children are involved, they'll remind you. They'll remind you that they experienced that. And that's never a nice moment for a parent. That's always a difficult moment for a parent to go through. And again, I'm not suggesting that conscious uncoupling or this process will 100% like protect everyone from it. But honestly, it does give people the best shot at creating a safe and nurturing and loving space. Because again, the kids didn't sign up for any of it, not for your marriage and not for your divorce,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And there's so much that each person is taking on in this story. And something that you said there and earlier as well around how I'm viewing the family unit, right? Nobody necessarily signed up for this in the beginning. And even though we are separating, and that is what this process is about, we're acknowledging that we are constantly going to be connected, and we have to choose how that connection is going to play out with all of life's turbulence that will come inevitably. And we talk about this in therapy all the time, in some of our past episodes as well. But therapy is not in the process of pursuing perfection in our lives. It's the process of gaining the tools and self-understanding to stay grounded and repair and bounce back when this inevitable turbulence comes. And having children in this process just means that there's one more body to keep sturdy on the boat, right? So do we have enough life vests, and where are they stored? Do we all know what that emergency protocol looks like?
That's beautiful.
Thank you. I'm feeling curious though, as we talk about intention and we talk about this unit and wanting to protect every party from kind of, I'll stay with the analogy, falling off the boat. How can a parent uncouple consciously when their co-parent is angry, avoidant, or dysregulated? How does that change the process?
Yeah.
And a huge part of what we're kind of talking about here is the intention that starts the moment that both partners show up together in the therapeutic space.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. It's a really important question. I think that's probably, and it really points to the real world, real life aspects of divorce. I mean, you want both people to be equally committed and equally mindful and equally intentional as they navigate their personal hurts and the relationship dynamics. But oftentimes there is a mismatch of energy, and people toggle. Like somebody shows up as present and regulated, and the other person is hurt and upset, and then they'll oftentimes switch roles, or one person is really being dragged through the process and is incredibly angry and has every right to be angry. There may have been an infidelity. There may have been other issues where they could point to concrete harm that was done. So it's not that the therapeutic process and the therapist's role isn't necessarily to minimize that or to somehow tell them that their pain isn't real and that the things that were done aren't as important as the emotional regulation. I think that's a conundrum. I think, and I don't want to give an easy answer here, but the important thing, again, the North Star for me personally and therapeutically is to realize that, and again, especially when kids are involved, like your ability to be predictable, to be present, to be safe, to be regulated is so incredibly important for the children, for their welfare, and ultimately, I would argue for yourself as well, that all of that can happen even in the absence of the other partner cooperating. They could be angry, they could be hostile, they could be taking shots at you, they can withdraw and disappear from the process as well. And it's really important to realize that you can still be all of those things for yourself and for your kids, even though obviously you're doing it as a one-man show. You're kind of in your own life raft. Hopefully you've got the kids with you. And again, where it becomes really messy and difficult is that, if you've got two parents that are not on the same page and the kids are toggling between one home and the other, and you're aware that in the other home, there's adulting and there's bad mouthing and there's and there's triangulation, all of the things. And that's incredibly distressing, right? Because not necessarily because you're worried about your personal reputation, but it's more like, that the damage that's being done. And that can be a very distressing time because you're being asked to not do anything about it. But the truth is there's very little that you can do to change what's happening on the other side. All you can do in those moments, unless of course we're talking about abuse or whatever that has to be taken outside of, but in terms of the therapeutic process is to be, the only thing you can do is to stay regulated and to stay intentional and to try to uphold those values and model that behavior for your kids so that they at the very least can see that you show up, that you're not bad-mouthing the other part, no matter what, that you're not triangulating, that you're not adulting. You can certainly tell them what's happening. There is a version of the story that is appropriate to kids, whatever age they might be. But past that and beyond that, you are responsible for the way that you carry yourself and how you model that behavior for your children. And that becomes the guiding light. How do I want to show up for my kids in the long run? How do I want them to see me so that, 5 years from now, 2 years from now, 10 years from now, when they turn back and they can look and say, you know what, mom or dad, like the other person was like really upset. They were really hurt. But at the very least, when I was with you, you were always calm. You were always collected. You were present. You were engaged in my homework. You were there for me. It wasn't drama every day. It was, we did our homework. We went to school. We did the things that we needed to do. So that becomes the guiding light. It's not a balm for all the pain, but it does become kind of the guiding light. When the other partner is not participating or is just too hurt or too angry, too upset to really participate in this process.
Right. Wow. How powerful one person can be in an entire unit, in an entire system. And if anything, I'm hearing how important it is to do your own individual work through this process, whether your partner is bought in or not, because we have to have that grounding in ourselves to be able to be that calm presence and that stable, predictable presence for our kids, and even for that partner if they end up finding their own regulation and coming back around to partake in this process as well. Something that is coming up so much for me here that we haven't quite touched on clearly yet, when we talk about intention and personal work and how we show up for others, I'm thinking about communication. And I'm wondering, what communication mistakes do you commonly see parents making that might unintentionally harm their children, as you reference, you know, that there is a story to fill your children in on, and that it's a delicate process, and there are best practices here.
Yeah, that's again, it's a moving target, but and every age requires a different level of story. But I think again, the guiding light in terms of communicating with your children around the divorce is to make it clear to them that this is something that's happening between mom and dad, or dad and dad, or mom and mom, whatever the dynamic is, and that it's really that there's nothing but love and care, and that both parents are unified around their concern, their love, and their care for the kids. And that it isn't, sometimes kids, if they're old enough, they'll take that on. They'll be like, is it because of us? Is it because I'm annoying, or I didn't do my homework? Or kids also try to fit in a narrative that makes sense. Like, how could it be that these people that are everything to me, that they're divorcing, that like somehow, the taking on that burden, on that shame, is a way of controlling the narrative. Or somehow, if I'm responsible for your divorced, and maybe there's something that I can do to make it better. And that's a really painful, heartbreaking moment. A lot of parents experience that. So very clear with the kids that this really isn't about them, that this is really mom and dad, or, the relationship, whatever it is. And so that's really, really, really important. And I think the other thing, and I touched on it before, it's really important. And this is hard because, again, you're going through the worst of it, is to never badmouth the other parent, no matter what they're doing. And they could be, in many cases, I've got couples that come in here, one of the partners is really like not behaving well. Like it is objectively, factually not what the things they've done or are doing are incredibly painful and damaging. And yet at the same time, it's very important that, as far as the kids are concerned, you're not undermining the other parent, you're not bad mouthing them. I think that's really, really important, because you might think that you're protecting them, or you might think that you're giving them some information that might be useful, but in fact you're creating a burden. You're creating a burden that they don't know what to do with. And because the other parent, no matter what, in most cases, like, is also an object of love and security and safety, and you're getting in the way of that. You're driving a wedge. You're creating an insecurity. You're creating a fundamental psychic disturbance that they don't have the machinery, they don't have the tools to deal with. So yeah, I think that that's really a golden rule. There's no bad mouthing. And the other part of it, which is to not adult them, to make them your emotional thermostat. They're not responsible for regulating yourself. No matter what, they're not responsible for regulating you. And that means that you're, again, it doesn't mean, a lot of parents ask me, well, does that mean that I can't have feelings, or I can't feel them around my children? So absolutely not. You can, but you are responsible for being able to regulate yourself, being able to show up in the relationship with the children in a way that feels manageable to them, right? Their well-being, emotional well-being, is in that instance the paramount value. And there are many things that you can do on your own, in a therapeutic setting, with your friends, with your support group, because this is, objectively a hard time for you to be able to find that oxygen and that bandwidth, so that when you do show up with the kids, it's keeping their well-being front and center. Yeah.
Hmm. How much work does each individual in this story have to do? And I'm just thinking about how lucky I am and thankful I'm feeling for you to be in this space with some of these couples going through this right now, and
Yeah.
for their children as well. And this, I'm holding so much space for this idea of protecting the illusion or the narrative of childhood for these children, and really having to stay so regulated in ourselves to protect that spillover from happening. And yeah, these, again, our children have so much more information than we give them credit for. And the more we can stay grounded in the story, the narrative that we share collectively as these partners separating with our children, the greater this this intention of stability and predictability can ground them. And yeah, I'm thinking about how many people in my life and in my clients' lives would benefit from being held in this way, having
Yeah.
their childhood protected in this way as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, it's, again, it's something that, the generation before us really didn't have this wherewithal, and they didn't have this guidance, and we do. And I think that more and more people are really availing themselves. They really understand, the importance of this thing. And so, yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. We in my practice in other places, individual or other couples, you see the fallout from divorce. You see the fallout from a divorce that's done, high conflict divorce, and the fallout. And it is very real. And there's some real world consequences in terms of, like, kid, attention, focus, emotional regulation. Children of divorce, high conflict divorces do suffer. It's very real. The impact is real. And so, yeah, I mean, anything that we can do to minimize that, to soften that, to protect that from happening, I think is really important work.
Mhm. Wow. All right. Well, Yaron, this has been such an expansive conversation. I feel so honored to get to lean on you and your personal and clinical expertise here. To close out for our listeners, I'm wondering if a parent listening in right now is terrified about their divorce coming up or how it's going to impact their children. What kind of reassurance or guidance can you offer to close us out today?
Yeah, I think parents who are overwhelmed or heartbroken or betrayed often struggle to regulate themselves. This is really the most overwhelming period in their lives. And again, like I've said in the beginning, there is no ritual, there is no ceremony. Having said that, there is life after divorce, and there is so much richness and so much nuance, that's waiting for people on the other side of the divorce. And I think that, my hope is that people can, in this moment of high conflict and real emotional turmoil, slow down and understand that even though the marriage isn't working out or is coming to an end, there is a version of this that looks like ending it well. There is an ending well. There is a way to live in a co-parenting harmony with your ex-partner and your kids. There is a version of that. I see it all the time. And so I think that it's hard to feel that and to see that in that moment when you're in the impact zone. But the more intentional, the slower you are, the more you kind of go through the process with the hope that, yeah, there's lots of life and lots of love and lots of happiness on the other side of this. The more you protect your kids and the better your relationship. I see this all the time now. Couples that were in high conflict situations became great co-parents, became great friends, became all kinds of interesting, like, configurations on vacations, couples with partners and friends and, blended families. There is so much richness. The tapestry really doesn't have to stop. It's not the end of the drawing or the painting. It's just, you can redraw it, reframe it, and you're giving yourself and your kids the best chance at success if you just slow down and remind yourself that there is plenty of life and love and happiness and everything beyond this moment, this awful moment that everyone's experiencing.
Beautiful, Yaron. Thank you so much for the encouragement and for all of the work that you're doing here.
Thank you, Tess. It was great being here.